Hello, I'm Olivia Mattis, and I'm delighted to welcome you today, June 1st, on behalf of the Sousa Mendes Foundation for a story that brings us back to our own hero. Now, even if you've seen some of the other Sousa Mendes films that we presented earlier, you haven't seen this one until this opportunity, The Consul of Bordeaux. It's a film that was a co-production between Portuguese television and Belgian television. And the original version was in Portuguese. What we showed you was the French version, dubbed into French. Maybe you didn't notice that it was dubbed with English subtitles. So it's a film that aired on both Portuguese television and Belgian television a few years ago. It was made in 2011. And it's a semi-fictionalized version of the Sousa Mendes story, which we usually don't show films like that. We usually show straight documentaries. So you might have questions about, well, what really happened in this film and what was fictionalized? Well, let me tell you right away that the central family, the brother and the sister, they are fiction. Even though I'm sure many stories like that did happen, there's no point in asking questions about what happened to them because they are fictional characters in this narrative. So let's just get that right off the bat. We have a stellar panel for you today with not one but two descendants of Aristides de Sousa Mendes. We have Gerald Mendes, who will be our first speaker. He is one of the grandchildren of Sousa Mendes. His father, Luis Felipe, was the 12th of Sousa Mendes's children. And then we also have Jan de MONCADA, who is a great grandson of Sousa Mendes. His grandfather was named Geraldo. Probably Gerald here was named after him. I don't know. They'll tell us. We also have Elizabeth Eames, who's an anthropologist, retired professor at Bates College. She used to live in Africa. She lived in Nigeria. She works very much today with refugees in the state of Maine, which is where she lives. And they're all here to tell you their stories. So we're going to start with Gerald and then Elizabeth and then Jan. Another thing you should know is that Gerald and I, for several years, organized a trip that the foundation does. It's called Journey on the Road to Freedom. And our intern Emil is going to put the link into the chat box in case this trip interests you, in case you want to come with us on a future tour. It's a 10-day trip through France, Spain, and Portugal, retracing the footsteps of Sousa Mendes and the refugees of 1940. And I have to say, if I have to say so myself, I think it's a very moving experience. So Jan and Elizabeth both took this trip the last time we did it, which was in 2023, and I'm sure they will talk a little bit about it as well. So Gerald is a retired engineer with a Sanofi pharmaceutical company. He now is busier than ever in his retirement. He's also a triathlete, and you will hear from him now. So Gerald, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you. And I hope you all enjoyed the film, The Consul of Bordeaux. As Olivia just mentioned, it's a semi-fiction based on historical facts and stories that are partially invented. There's beautiful music, but there's also some differences, little differences about Aristides himself. For instance, Aristides never pulled out a gun to the head of anybody. I don't think so. Um, about Aristides, and you can see the picture here when he's aged about 50 years old with my grandmother, who was probably around 47, I would think, 46 or 47. And I'll read a short extract of memories that were written by my own father, Louis Philippe, in 1987, and that's a few months before he passed away. And actually, my father never saw or heard about the rehabilitation in Portugal. So my father wrote in 1987, Aristides was a loving husband and father, a generous heart hidden in the appearance of the authority that his position and features commended. He was a tall, rather strong-bodied person with a great sense of humor, always finding time for a good joke. His wife, Angelina, was very devoted to him, to the children, and the other members of the household. From Papa Aristides, I inherited my love for the Portuguese language, living in several countries other than Portugal. It was impractical to receive Portuguese lessons otherwise than at home. And my mother used to make me read the Portuguese classics and other texts, making me write text analysis and dictation. This describes a bit my grandparents, who they were. And here we can see this family picture, and you can see in the center, beside in the arms of my grandmother, there's Louis Philippe, my father. And you can see in his name, there's a Z instead of the Portuguese S. That's because he was born in Tui, Spain, just at the border, while my grandfather was working in Vigo in those years. And you can see at the right, Geraldo, he has the same name as I. So he's the grandfather of Jan, who will talk also. And you can see other members of family, including Pedro Nuno, who later helped his father issue visas in 1940. So after Vigo, the family moved to Antwerp, Belgium. And we can go to the slide here where you can see again Louis Philippe, who's a bit older, 7 or 8 years old, little John Paul, who was born uh, in um, in Belgium, and then the three older sisters, Clotilde, Isabelle, and Joanna. I'd like to mention that it's also in Antwerp, Belgium, that my grandfather was where he was appointed in 1931. And according to my father, this would prove to be one of the most enriching and rewarding assignments of his whole career. That started in Zanzibar, and then San Francisco, Brazil, Vigo, Belgium, and later in Bordeaux, as we know. So from Antwerp, from Antwerp, and later Louvain, or it was first Louvain and then Antwerp in Belgium. From there, the whole family traveled in their big car called the Expresso dos Montes Germíneos. This was the other name for the Serra de Estrela, which that were the mountains that they could see from their village in Cabanas de Viriato. So it was also with regret that the family left Belgium to move to Bordeaux, where Aristides was assigned in June of 1940. I'll just let the slide come back here. Perhaps, yes. Thank you. So this is where the events happened in Bordeaux at the consulate that was located on Quai Louis XVIII near the Garonne River, where he issued many thousands of visas, including also in Bayonne and Hendaye, as we saw in the movie, as you saw in the movie. And a few months later, after these events, when he returned to Portugal, just a few months later, there was the administrative trial and the punishment from Salazar. First, a 6 month layoff with half pay, and then put off to his early retirement, and too early retirement at age 55, with when he wasn't prepared in terms of income. It was cut because it was very early retirement, and in the family, we believe that he didn't receive actually a paycheck before 1943, around there, because of the bureaucracy under the Salazar regime. So he had to mortgage his home. They had to eat after the war. It became very difficult. They were hoping that Salazar would forgive and rehabilitate Aristides, but this never came. It became even worse. And so they had to mortgage the home. And um, and until and then all the children had to leave one by one because there was no more future for them in Portugal. And my father was the last one to leave. Louis Philippe, he went to Canada in 1948 after his mother passed away. Uh, In terms of homages, the very first homage was in Yad Vashem. In Yad Vashem, we can see a picture here of the family with my Aunt Joanna holding the medal that was handled that was presented to them by Rabbi Chaim Kruger in 1967, 1 year, a few months after the actual uh, homage of righteous amongst the nations in Yad Vashem that happened in 1966. It's also when my father came back from that trip in 1967. I was 10 years old, and that's the first time I heard my father, Louis Philippe here. His name, he changed it to Louis Philippe in Canada. We lived in Montreal, and that's when I first heard about the story. And I must say I was very proud of what my grandfather did, and I later discovered over the years more of the story. Uh, the family home was in the meantime became a symbol of the punishment. The family home, which was a beautiful mansion until 1940, was abandoned shortly after the war and left totally abandoned. There was pillage, and until it was finally saved. They reconstructed a roof in 2015 and fixed the walls a little bit. Later, there were several homages, including at the Pantheon in Portugal. Several homages that happened in the U.S. and France and Canada, of course, Yad Vashem, and the rehabilitation officially took place in 1988, and he became pantheonized, if I may say, in October 2021. This was probably the top homage for him in Portugal. Homages continued later on in Israel. We see in Paris also, an avenue was named. Many cities in Europe, in Jerusalem also. And this was in 2022, in November time, I think, 2022. And since also the house became a museum that was inaugurated last summer in 2024. A beautiful museum that had so far since July of almost a year now, almost 35,000 visitors, and the critics are all very good, very good. It's a big success, and I invite you to go and visit it if, when you'll have time to go to Portugal. On this, I would like to hand over to Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you, Gerald. That was very useful and helpful. So I'm probably asked to speak to you today because my mother was one of Aristides, I don't know how to say it, I'm going to say ASM's visa recipient, and because I can attest to the rich benefits of having joined the 2023 journey. It's called Journey on the Road to Freedom. It was a tour following, as Olivia mentioned, this route. About 15 years ago, Olivia found me via my mother's obituary. She helped me understand that the Rosendahl family was saved by ASM when 2 visas were granted to Julienne and Yvonne and their children ranging in age from 5 to 15. I should say 5 children ranging in age from 5 to 15. My mother, Agnes, was the middle child. Joining the 2023 journey helped me understand so much. How the family's flight could have gone wrong at so many turns. How the profound trauma of dislocation was imprinted on my young mother. It even helped me understand her absolute determination to conform, as well as how this attempt was doomed to failure. Okay, the first slide. When Olivia found me, I had already been volunteering to assist resettled refugees. These women are from Somalia, southern Somalia, and I'm doing a financial literacy training with them. Olivia's information helped me better understand why this unpaid labor had felt to me so much like a calling. Looking back with my mother's history in mind, I can also understand why I became a professional cultural anthropologist. Not only was I, as the only girl child, a perpetually mystified observer of my 3 brothers' behavior, but I think I was born an anthropologist because my parents had remarkably divergent origins. I grew up knowing that cultural distinctions do exist, but that people can build understanding and loving relationships across difference. Whenever my mother got together with her family, they spoke another language. Of course, later I realized it was French, which she never used with us. All of her family, but not her, had what seemed to me like cosmopolitan accents and mannerisms, body language, and even values. I sort of knew that a traumatic story of flight and survival hovered in the background, but it was a murky cloud, unspoken. And as to any Jewishness, that was repudiated. We were told they had to flee because the invaders would misunderstand the name Rosendahl as Jewish. That seemed fishy to some of us cousins. Others of us bought the story hook, line, and sinker. I now can understand it as a poignant reaction to rampant anti-Semitism, combined with a drive to assimilate. But the 9 cousins have since uncovered that my mother's mother was descended from a prominent French rabbinical family, and my mother's father was the scion of an international industrial enterprise. Yes, of course, Jewish. Okay, so now the next picture, yeah. Before Europe rumbled, Julienne and Yvonne Rosendahl were enjoying a prosperous life in the industrial city of Lille in northern France near Belgium. In the summer of 1939, they went on a summer holiday to Brittany, and then they kept staying and staying and staying. The kids were mystified. They ended up going to school in Brittany. They didn't understand it. And it turned out they never returned to their home in Lille. Sometime in May of 1940, they loaded up into their vehicle for the flight south. In later years, my mother described memories of driving as a young girl past so many people of all ages trekking south, carrying their heavy loads. I now know that they ended up in Bordeaux with so many hundreds of thousands of internally displaced people. Today's film depicted that situation. Moreover, it illustrated the racialization of ethnicity in that time. It also somewhat revealed the class structure and leads me to wonder if my cultured, prosperous, multilingual grandparents found themselves in a slightly better situation than the masses or thrown in with them. I believe my mother lived her entire life with the moral injury of feeling both grateful and déclassée. So during this trip that we went on in 2023, I got to gaze upon the precious ASM visa registry and found that my grandparents were the last 2 names listed on June 15th. You can see the next day is June 16th is stamped there. Our film depicts the waiting, the anxious energy contained on that multi-flight staircase at the consulate. I could just think of seeing that. It just made me think of how they had waited and waited all day, maybe for weeks. Okay, a few days later, so the next slide, right? A few days later, by the 19th of June, the night Bordeaux was bombed, they were already aboard a ship moored in the harbor. That was depicted in our film as well. It was a searing event for my aunts and uncles, but was always told as a story of peril, yes, but plain and out of context. Now I better understand the place, where and when and why, or its place, where and when and why. The more fully formed tale that most of us heard was that other ships in the convoy were torpedoed, but theirs made it through. We heard this miracle explained with the following story. As they first set out across the Atlantic on the eve of France's fall, the captain called a few of the men, including my grandfather, into his cabin, handed them each a gun, and told them that he was tearing up his orders that had come from the French Navy because it had fallen, and was taking a new route so as to avoid the German U-boats. Should the crew mutiny in response, these men were told to use the guns. No mutiny occurred, thankfully, and they were never torpedoed. So they stopped in Casablanca, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and then New York. And I'm sure there's stories all around that, but I don't know them, and even if I did, I wouldn't have time. After a brief stay at the Barbizon Hotel in Manhattan, they moved to Queens, first Forest Hills, then Kew Gardens, and finally to Great Neck. They settled in Great Neck on Long Island's North Shore. Julian continued commodities trading, but now from 10 Rockefeller Plaza. To their usual cotton waste trade, tobacco was added. By 1946, they all seemed to have had their US visas settled, and during this process, they each changed their name in one way or another. Yvonne became Nanette. None of us ever knew her ever as anything other than Nanette. Other names were anglicized. All added the middle name de Horst to honor a side of the family wiped out in the camps. Okay. Soon after the war ended, Julien returned to scope out how things were in Lille. Apparently, everything was in a shambles. This leads to another story some of us knew, but most of us didn't. He was tipped off somehow that his household furniture had been purloined to a freight harbor in Brussels. Arriving, he looked around the vast jumbled array of goods and finally spotted the wooden angel in this photo from 1972. That set of furniture made it back to Great Neck, and we all recall Grandmama surrounded by all that old stuff. So at this time, this is 1972, I was growing up on Long Island with 3 younger brothers and a father who was Lutheran farm boy from the plains of Minnesota who had joined the Navy and seen the world, as they say, and then benefited from the GI Bill. They were by then trying really hard to blend into suburbia. In 1972, when I was a junior in high school, my father organized a family excursion to see The Sorrow and the Pity by Marcelo Fulz. And he was in the news lately because he died this week at the age of 94. For me personally, seeing that movie really was enlightening. I remember asking questions of my mother and her family members around that time, but still never getting a full narrative version of what happened, just bits, snippets, and disconnected puzzle pieces. I remember feeling absolutely compelled to, secretly, mind you, sit at the keyhole, listening to the muffled sounds of my own mother narrating her story chronologically to her friend's daughter for a school project. She could never tell her own daughter that story. My embodied memory of crouching outside the door with my hand around my ear, struggling to discern the words that were, and their import, still moves me to jealous tears. Being on the 2023 Journey tour taught me, though, that me and my cousin's experience of not knowing, of floundering, is rather common. In fact, as I mentioned, I work alongside resettled African refugees in Maine, and their trauma response turns out to be astoundingly similar. Their children are currently floundering here in Lewiston, Maine, in the wake of unspoken family tales. Daily in my volunteer work, I observe caverns of cultural and linguistic misunderstandings opening up between the generations. This may be frustrating to chronicle as the adult child of a refugee mother, but as an anthropologist, I have learned to respect the humanity in it. Okay, so being at the museum, okay, so there are my mother, and yes, in the middle, and her siblings, with their new names. Here's my grandmother, Nanette, in the middle with the shawl, with the blue shawl. It's her 90th birthday party that those of us who could, drove to. And the people with names are her blood kin, her blood descendants. These children in the front row now have the children of their own, one of whom was getting married in that picture, which again, all the blood kin are in this picture that could make it to that wedding. So being at the museum well, first we went on this trip to Bordeaux was first. There's Jan next to his great-grandfather's statue. There I am in the front. And these are the people who were descendants of visa recipients who made it on this trip together. There's the bridge at Hendaye on the way out, important symbolically and emotionally. This spot is the train station on the border of Portugal, and there is a museum there that was, for me, the emotional highlight of the trip. This museum is absolutely amazing. The other museum had not been, the museum at the house had not yet been started. Okay, and at the end where you think you're coming out to a gift shop, it turns out you come out to this spot of remembrance where the photographs of the descendants who had come to the museum are placed. So that was a very meaningful moment. You can see that picture from 1988 up on the wall. And here's the memorial stone that people who go on the trip get to place in this spot. So that's my family's memorial stone. Very moving moment. And this was a light moment near the end of the trip that was very fun. But I can't thank the foundation and you, Olivia, enough from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of all of my relatives, living and dead, for the enlightenment from this trip. The final activity was meeting the chatty and charismatic president of Portugal, a great supporter of ASM's legacy, including the foundation. And that was a highlight of the trip for all of us. The emotion on this occasion was delight rather than chagrin. It was truly an excellent way to conclude our shared educational adventure. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Gerald. So now we're going to see a couple of video clips starring our next guest, who is Jan de Moncada. Jan grew up in Portugal. He now lives in France. He speaks many languages. And so he was on that trip, as you saw. So we're going to first see a little clip of him greeting the group, and then we're going to get his reaction to that clip.
This is very emotional for me and a great honor to be here with you. Never in my life did I really have a lot of contact with descendants of visa recipients. All my life, I've seen my father and my uncles talk about Aristides de Sousa Mendes in events, in schools. It's part of our identity as a family. I'm looking forward to knowing about you and your families because I know that it will help me understand mine better.
So Jan, welcome. So glad you're here.
Thanks for the invitation. So first of all, I want to greet the audience, and I wish to insist on something I've said in that trip, that every time I have these opportunities to share comments, stories, and opinions, just discuss the events of around my great-grandfather's actions. I feel truly honored and blessed, and it still is very emotional. Just to complete this comment, it used to be for many years and decades, it used to be my father's generation's job to do this, and slowly my generation now has started to talk about this to their friends, and slowly but surely we are starting to assume that role of speaking about these events. So the clip you've seen, the clip you just saw was I think the one of the first, maybe the first stop in Bordeaux of the trip. So as you noticed the bust, the statue of my great grandfather, that was one of the first homages paid after Aristide ASM's rehabilitation in 1986. So it was a very slow process. 1986 in Portugal. Okay, so in other countries there had been efforts to rehabilitate the name and to pay homage, but in Portugal it was still something. It was a very touchy subject because of how recent the dictatorship fell in Portugal. So Salazar was the dictator during the Second World War, and after him followed his successors. Yeah, and the dictatorship only it lasted until 1974. So in '86, it was still very fresh, and a lot of the people of the former regime were still in key positions in the establishment. So it made the effort of rehabilitation very difficult. So it started in '86 in Portugal, and slowly but surely it started gaining momentum until in the early 2000s. There was a TV show that existed in also other countries. I don't know if you had it in the United States. It was kind of a survey of who's the favorite historic figure of the country. So I know that more or less at the same time there was a version of this show in France, in Spain, etc., all throughout Europe, and it happened more or less in Portugal too. So why am I mentioning this? It's because from '86 to early 2000s, the rehabilitation process gained momentum to the point that Aristides de Sousa Mendes became the third favorite historic personality in Portugal. And that's when it really hit me. That at school, my friends, I was 14 in 2000. So early 2000s, yeah, teenager, I started noticing my friends would come up to me and talk to me about my great grandfather. And suddenly I realized then that what was a family. How can I say what was I felt it belonged only to the family, this story, this heritage. Suddenly I realized that it was public domain, and uh, in and so, like I said in the clip, I never really had the opportunity to mingle with descendants because I was very young. And in 2023, with this trip, it was the first time I had the opportunity by myself to meet descendants. So it was a very special moment for me because before I had met some too. But in homages with my family, my uncles, my father, with Gerald, and we were all together, and I never really connected personally with any descendant. And in 2 years ago, it was a fantastic opportunity, eye-opening opportunity for me. I learned so much about my family, like I said in the clip, about the descendants, and it was a very, very touching, very moving situation. So going back to that clip, that was the one of the first big international homages that were paid to Aristides de Sousa Mendes, and after that, many other followed. Many others followed until recently. The Pantheonization in Lisbon, streets, avenues, boulevards, squares named after my great grandfather. Funny enough, in Montreal, just two streets far from where I lived for a couple of years, suddenly there's a beautiful mural. So it's beautiful to see. It's beautiful to see. I'm very happy, and I'm very happy to be able to discuss this with you. And it just makes me uh, honestly, it's I don't know. I can't even find the words, and I'm trying to think in French, which is my better language. and I still can't find the words. So anyway, a little word about the movie. I'm very happy that you express interest in these movies, considering that there is not that much material out there. Suddenly, there are more and more movies being distributed, which is it's wonderful. And it doesn't really matter if it's romanticized or not. As a family member, I'm so happy that the story is out there. And in my personal opinion, I know that some people in my family have a different opinion about that. I don't really care that it's romanticized. I don't really care that they take artistic liberties as long as the facts are there. That's the most important for me. So saying this, maybe we can look at the second clip, which is
Okay.
was for me one of the most moving moments probably in my life.
So before we get to this next clip, let me just remind the audience members to keep putting those questions into the chat box. I saw a couple of people raise their hands. We don't recognize raised hands. We do need for you to type your questions out, I'm afraid. So if you could do that, that would be wonderful. Now, this next clip shows Jan, also on our tour, going into the consulate in Bordeaux where the magic happened, the miracle happened. And Jan had never been there before. The little clip will start out in German. It was a German film crew that came along with us. So the narrator is in German, there are English subtitles, Jan will speak in French. So don't let any of that bother you. But we are now going to see the second clip.
Gleich neben dem Park befand sich damals das portugiesische Generalkonsulat. Im 2. Stock wohnte und arbeitete Aristides de Sousa Mendes. Das Gebäude ist heute ein Wohnhaus und steht seit einem Brand 2019 leer. Zum ersten Mal in seinem Leben betritt Jan de MONCADA die Räume.
C'est très émouvant parce que c'est un lieu qui est chargé d'une énergie particulière. D'après ce que je sais, c'était dans les pièces qui donnaient sur la rue qu'étaient installés les bureaux du consulat. Moi, j'imagine cet endroit, cette vue-là, ça devait être rempli de réfugiés faisant la queue, s'accumulant devant l'entrée de l'immeuble. Ça devait être particulier.
Wie schwer es für Aristides de Sousa Mendes war, diese Visa auszustellen, lässt sich nur erahnen. Offiziell gab sich Portugal neutral. Gleichzeitig waren die Konsulate angehalten, Ausländern unbestimmter Nationalität und ausgewiesenen Juden ein Visum nach Portugal zu verweigern. Am 14. Juni 1940 fielen die deutschen Truppen in Paris ein. Die französische Hauptstadt war in deutscher Hand und so spitzte sich auch in Bordeaux die Situation weiter zu. Aristides de Sousa Mendes befand sich in einem Dilemma. Sollte er die Anordnung der Regierung befolgen und die Menschen dem sicheren Tod ausliefern oder sich widersetzen? Er zog sich in sein Schlafzimmer zurück. Er rang mit sich, bis er zusammenbrach.
Peut-être que ça a eu lieu par ici, où il a eu son nervous breakdown. Ou peut-être que ça a eu lieu un peu plus loin dans l'appartement. Il faut imaginer cet endroit rempli de réfugiés de toutes sortes, puisqu'il y a des récits témoignant qu'il y avait des personnes un peu partout et qu'il les avait accueillis ici, tant dans les bureaux du consulat que dans la partie qui était réservée à lui et sa famille.
Am Ende folgte Sousa Mendes seinem christlichen Glauben und seinem Gewissen.
Moi, je me mets à sa place. Faut avoir du caractère pour aller chercher la confiance nécessaire pour entreprendre une telle démarche. Il a décidé à ce moment-là qu'il donnerait un visa. Voilà, indépendamment de l'origine, nationalité, religion, quiconque avait besoin d'un visa, il allait lui donner.
Okay, Jan, back to you.
Yes. All right. So before the clip, I mentioned that this was one of the key moments in my life because, like I said, I grew up with this story. I grew up with this story, listening to my uncles, my father talk about this, going to schools, making presentations, etc., etc. But I had never been inside the consulate. I had been into to Bordeaux, but several locations, but never had the opportunity to enter the building. We had that authorization thanks to the efforts of Olivia and the organizers of the trip, as well as the film crew. And so we had that opportunity. We visited, and for me, from like now a very personal note, it was. I felt something I'd never felt before. Also, the fact that in 2019 there was a big fire there contributed to giving a special aura to that place. Everything was burnt, as you can see, the remains of ashes on the walls, etc., etc. It made me my imagination started working on its own, and I could imagine like a war scenario there, although that never happened. But it just contributed to making it real in my mind, and so it was a very special moment. Obviously, I was standing there looking at the window, could imagine the floor full of refugees, people fighting for not even fighting for their life, fighting for hope, you know, because that's all they had at that moment. The refugees in Bordeaux at that day, at that time, that's all they had, a little bit of hope. And that little bit of hope depended on a stamp on a piece of paper. So it, it's it was very intense, and so if you have the opportunity, if you're curious about these events, it's a beautiful trip. And it's also a very beautiful city, but that's a side note. Um, so what I want to say about this is that more than the events, the chronology, the day, the what happened when, etc., the details. Uh, I'm happy that we're all here together discussing something that is supposed to give us a positive perspective, and uh, m- focus on the future with a positive outlook. Why am I saying this? It's because I feel that in my family, uh, there has been a change recently, as if they felt that with all the attention it's getting now from people like you, foundations here and there, as if the responsibility the family had to talk about this story and spread the heritage out there, it's no longer of our responsibility. Suddenly we can relax, and we can heal because uh, this is something I also realized during the trip, is that we carry these traumas from a generation to another. We transmit them from one generation to another, and I can see now how many little memories I have of my childhood, conversations with uncles, etc., were full of trauma that I had never understood, and I've been understanding it bit by bit since 2023, a couple of years ago when I was part of this trip. So it's
Wonderful.
always very personal. So I hope I don't bore you with these comments.
Thanks, Jan. So um, now I'm going to make some announcements, and then we're going to turn to audience questions. So first of all, audience members, please continue putting your questions into the chat box. There are a few questions, but please add more. And now I'm going to show you, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we have upcoming in the month of June, and then we're going to show you a little trailer for an upcoming film. So we have 2 more programs coming up in the month of June. Next week, returning to a very fun topic with I guess traumatic undertones, but the topic itself is very fun, which is the Jewish history of comic book superheroes. And who knew that the Holocaust actually gave rise to some of the superheroes that we know and love today?
Of course.
So this is a fabulous topic, and a lot of you have already signed up. It's another free program like today, so I hope you will continue to sign up. We want a nice big audience, so tell all your friends. Obviously, it'll be for all ages. And then later in the month, which is on June 22nd, we have a program where we're going to focus on a modern day hero. His name is Ephraim Zuroff. He is the head of the Israeli branch of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And there's a film about him called The Last Nazi Hunter. I guess his Nazi hunting days are maybe a little bit behind him, but he certainly has a lot to tell you about how he personally tried to make up for the failure of the civilized world to take Nazi perpetrators to account. There were the Nuremberg trials, there was the Adolf Eichmann trial, but most of the Nazi leadership, let alone the rank and file, got off scot-free and lived beautiful, productive lives, even though they had caused so many victims in the war. So there are several Nazi hunters who sort of propped up. There was Simon Wiesenthal himself. There are the Klarsfeld couple in France that we profiled last year. And on June 22nd, we're going to profile the work of Ephraim Zuroff. And now we're going to show you a little trailer for the film, The Last Nazi Hunter.
Send people to the river to be murdered. It's not business as usual if someone like Capiro, against whom there is so much evidence, and it's so clear what he did, and he's so guilty that this is a person who shouldn't be allowed to live his life in peace and tranquility, and he has to pay for the crime. I'm sure you're all wondering where this Shando Capiro lives. Well, why don't you all just look outside the window across the street at that apartment building? That's where he lives.
Okay, so you will all be getting an email after today's program with information on signing up for these programs, and I hope you will. Now, there are several questions about our trip, Journey on the Road to Freedom. One question is it open to people who have no personal connection to the story? Yes, it is. And we hope you will sign up. So Emil is going to put the link again into the chat box. We are starting a waiting list for our future trip whenever it is. It might be in 2026. But basically, it's as soon as we have enough people to run a trip, that's when we will schedule it. So if it interests you at all, go ahead and fill out the questionnaire. Emil is putting that link into the chat box. The questionnaire ends by your pressing a button called Sign Me Up, and then it takes you to a PayPal link to send a deposit. Don't send a deposit, but do press sign me up, and then we'll have all your information and we will be able to contact you when it's time for the next trip. We do have a trip actually next month, which is aimed specifically at teachers. It is basically full, but if you are dying to come on it, it might be possible. So let us know that as well. But you would have to let us know immediately because that trip starts in 5 weeks. So Jan and Gerald, there are numerous questions about what happened to the family. There are many branches of the family, right? Because Sousa Mendes had all these children. One question is, why did the Sousa Mendes children leave Portugal? Another question is, how did Sousa Mendes support his family after the events of 1940? I mean, the question is basically, what happened to the different branches of the family? Maybe you can each speak about your own branch, whichever one of you would like to go first.
I'll let you start, Gerald.
Okay, thank you, Jan. So the large family, some of the eldest, my aunt Isabel, who was the oldest, was married already. They went to live in the Belgian Congo. Her husband was from Belgium. That's where they had met when they lived there. And then others, the grandmother of Jan, my aunt Clotilde, they went to live in Mozambique. And two of my uncles, Sebastian and Carlos, who were born in San Francisco, actually. They were American by birth. And when the Americans declared war, they decided they wanted to go and join the forces in England, and they were later parachuted on D+1 on D-Day +1 on the second day over Normandy, and they fought until they got to Bastogne. They were in the Battle of Bastogne in two regiments, and they eventually met there. And then after the war, they returned to Portugal very shortly, but just to go back and live in California, where they greeted many others of the families, including my aunt Teresina, my aunt Joana, others, my uncle John Paul, Teresina, so many went there. The last one to leave was actually my father, Louis Philippe. He stayed with his parents. He after my grandfather suffered a stroke that paralyzed him on the right hand, he became his secretary, was writing the letters, and was also giving the medications that they had to give him based on prescriptions that they had back then. But then when my grandmother passed away, my grandfather asked him to leave. Aristides himself tried at one point to leave, but then that didn't work. That didn't work. So he stayed and tried to fight for his own cause until the end of his life, basically. So there was basically no future. When we hear the stories from some of my uncles, even in the schools, they were ostracized. They were. We fortunately, our generations didn't have to live through dictatorships, but this dictatorship in Portugal was the longest one in Europe, and we need to go and visit a museum in Peniche to visit the jails of Salazar to understand that it wasn't comfortable life. You never knew when you would be detained by the PID, the police, and so it was scary. I wasn't too long there.
Jan, is there something you'd like to add?
Yeah, so Gerald said much of what there is to say. Little pieces of personal information about that. So yes, the dictatorship was in Portugal was was softer than what we can imagine, but the muscle was there. And so it led to a generalized sense of fear. People couldn't speak freely, couldn't gather in meetings, etc., etc. And if you did, you would get a visit of the political police in your, at home, and no one would know really when you would come back. So, but about the what the family endured after, like Gerald said, most of the children fled. Aristide's children fled. There wasn't room for them. There was no future for them in Portugal. Okay, so there were. It was official inside the government that people who wore the Sousa Mendes last name were to have their life made difficult. So what did that mean? That meant that no jobs in a government, for example. No, it was very difficult to imagine a professional future in Portugal for whoever had wore that last name. Universities, no access to superior education. So, for example, my father, who was grew up a little bit in Portugal, but also in Africa. Knew that he wasn't going to be able to study in Portugal. So very quickly, he had to live abroad, studied abroad, studied in Russia, Canada, etc. Anyway, and about something that Gerald mentioned, schools. My father, who was born in 49, when he went to primary school, when he was like 5 years old, my children's age, and this is personal because of that. When he was 5, 6 years old, when he learned how to read and write, elementary school, first grade, there was instruction that this child is not going to pass to the next year. So my father, when he was 5 or 6, very young, not able to understand why or the nature of this punishment, why was he not able to follow his friends to the next year? So it was generalized punishment. Sousa Mendes, your life is going to be made difficult here. So everybody fled. Everybody built a new life abroad, and among us, we call it the Sousa Mendes diaspora. You know, a little bit like the Jewish diaspora. We have our own little diaspora, and afterwards, so in '86, my father came back to Portugal. And you might ask, but what did all the cousins leave? No, not all the cousins left. Some of my father's cousins stayed in Portugal, but only had access to military jobs. And one of them, one of our cousins, one of Gerald's cousins, participated in the liberation and the fall of the dictatorship in 1974. Francisco de Sousa Mendes. Just little piece of free information.
We are getting right up to the end of the hour. I haven't heard Elizabeth say anything yet. So maybe Elizabeth, you want to go next, and then real quickly, Jan and Gerald, some final thoughts. But Elizabeth, let's hear from you.
Thank you. So could we get that photo up, please, Matthew? So when we were planning this, and I was told I'd have a final thing to say, Matthew Spurn, who's behind the scenes, I don't know if you all can see him, he invoked this memorable painting by René Magritte. It's called La Décalcomanie, sorry. And I guess that kind of comes from the word decal in English, where it means like transferring a tracing of or stamping an image on. And he drew my attention to psychologist Dr. Suzanne Moreau's Zoom session for this group, I guess it was a few years ago, on generational trauma, where she concluded that, quote, even silence leaves an image, even if it is a negative imprint, unquote. And so, yes, the imprint is certainly present. The Rosendahl side of my family may be loving and accomplished, curious and capable, but we are too a perpetually anxious and fretful lot in search of answers receding into oblivion.
Good. Jan and Gerald, anything real quick you want to add?
I'm just going to finish with one of my favorite quotes. Aristides de Sousa Mendes' quote that you probably heard in the movies, but I find it's a beautiful way to end this, especially in our day and age where we have all these issues going on. I might be butchering it in English, but it goes something like this. I'd rather be with God against men than with men against God. For you guys who are religious or non-religious, the idea of God, I think we can all grasp, understand what that is. I'll end here. Thank you very much.
Gerald?
And so I'll just mention that with all these homages and streets and plaques and places that are named after Sousa Mendes in the museum, every time there's an inauguration, we must remind ourselves that what's even more important than paying an homage to Aristides is the lessons that we learned for today and the future. And one of them, again, is that indifference is probably the worst thing for people who are persecuted and refugees. Thank you.
Okay. Wow, the hour just flew by. Thanks to our fabulous speakers. Thanks to our audience that comes week after week. Do send us an expression of interest if you want to come on our next journey. We'd love to have you. And see you all next week for our next program of the Sousa Mendes Foundation. Be well, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.